It's one of the most remote places on Earth, a harsh and unforgiving land, the Australian outback. A group of intrepid scientists have come here to unlock a mystery 50,000 years in the making. They're searching for the megabeasts that once roamed these vast plains, to discover how they lived and why they died. We know a lot about the mass extinction of the dinosaurs. But for the Australian Ice Age animals known as Megafauna, the case files are very thin. It's an area of research with far more questions than answers.
Nearly all of the megafauna that went extinct in Australia were truly unique in that they were not found anywhere else in the world.
They're big.
The largest plant eater in Australia was Diprotodon. This was a huge marsupial, the largest that has ever lived.
They're bizarre.
The marsupial lion, for example, Thylacoleo carnifex. This was a lioness-sized marsupial predator with flick blades for claws and bolt cutters for teeth.
But many are tender too, protecting their young. These supersized creatures walk this land for millions of years, battling climate change, bushfires, drought, and predation. Any one of these could have triggered their demise. Or maybe it was something even more devastating. Today, scientific sleuths are racing to crack the case. Under the vast, treeless Null Arbor Plain, cavers make one of the greatest fossil discoveries of the century. It sends shockwaves around the world.
The cavers found a complete skeleton of the marsupial lion, Thylacoleo. It was in absolutely pristine condition. The most complete skeleton that had ever been found. Quite a remarkable set of circumstances.
Paleontologist Dr. Gavin Prideaux leads a special operation to recover the fossils.
It was a pretty unique feeling. I don't expect I'll ever have it again. It was amazement at the beautiful preservation of the specimen. The animal was so complete, you could virtually imagine it just taking its last breath, dropping down dead.
Thylacoleo means pouched lion. Like many Australian creatures today, it's a marsupial, a mammal that carries its young in a pouch. In this subterranean treasure trove, scientists find more remains, undisturbed for hundreds of thousands of years. They identify nearly all of them, but 8 skeletons are a mystery. They're a completely new species.
What I'm doing at the moment is putting together a skeleton, one of the new remarkable species of extinct kangaroo from the Thylacoleo caves on the Null Arbor Plain. We think they're aged at about 500,000 years and still remains undescribed.
Over the last 500 million years, there have been other mass extinctions of large terrestrial animals. But the death of the megabeasts is recent in natural history terms, less than 60,000 years ago. And no one knows why they disappeared. Today, scientists are on the verge of a major breakthrough. At Colorado's Institute of Arctic and Alpine Research, they're piecing together the puzzle. They begin with the eggshells of one of the largest flightless birds ever to walk the Earth. The gigantic Genyornis. The tiny pieces of eggshell contain clues about the types of plants the birds were eating when they went extinct.
Genyornis was really a massive bird, somewhere around 2 meters or 6 feet, and it weighed something like 200 kilograms. It was probably a forager. It had a very large beak.
The Genyornis lives alongside the Australian emu, one of the world's largest surviving birds. Even though they're similar in height and neither can fly, the Genyornis was up to 6 times heavier.
To give some idea of how big and robust they are, we can do a size comparison between the modern emu, which this is a bone I picked up off the road from a roadkill. This is the femur, or the thigh bone from the emu. And this is the same bone, but from the Genyornis, a giant flightless extinct bird. And you can see not only are they bigger, but they're so much wider and much more robust. These are very heavy, big animals.
The most widespread remains of this giant bird are its fragile eggshells. They provide valuable clues about what it ate.
We're heading now down towards Coral Bay in Western Australia, and we're driving through a dune field. On either side of us are the ridges of large dune field, and it's in these dune fields where the wind has blown the sand away that we're most likely to be able to find the eggshells of Genyornis. We should find some nice collections. See, you're starting to pick them up here. A little bit of secondary carbonate on them.
Professor Gifford Miller believes these ancient sand dunes hold the secret to the Megabeast mystery.
Oh yes, I can see a few bits appearing here.
Yeah, and there should be some right up on top here. I think we'll find some more.
This isn't an ordinary egg hunt.
Yeah, there should be some up in here. It's a place we found.
Oh yeah, there's a
before.
good collection here.
Oh yeah. Yeah, okay, there they are.
Yeah.
What is it? It looks like emu. Let's see. Emu and Genyornis coexisted not only at the same time, but they actually nest in the same area. So it's very frequent that when we find Genyornis eggshells, we'll also find emu eggshells at the same site.
Using the eggshell samples, they compare the diets of the two birds and the environment they share. They also determine the age of the fossils.
Because we find these eggshells with the same secondary carbonate, which is like cement. It's the same stuff like this that forms in the soil here, and it's actually stuck onto the eggshell, so that we know that this is old eggshell, that it actually comes out of these sediments. And Gifford has dated eggshell from here to 25,000.
The giant Genyornis is strictly a plant eater. Miller wonders if an environmental change might have disrupted its food supply and caused its extinction. He turns to the eggshells of its neighbor, the emu, for clues.
And so what we've done is we've taken the bird that does not go extinct, the modern emu, and then we've looked back 100,000 years, and we've reconstructed what the birds were eating during that period, and then what they were eating after the big bird goes extinct.
Using a method called amino acid racemization, he dates the eggshells.
When we collect eggshell in the field, we often find that there is sediment adhering to the eggshell that we can't remove by simply scraping. So we need to grind that away because it has within it amino acids that are not from the eggshell itself.
He also analyzes the different kinds of carbons contained in each eggshell to better understand the bird's diet. Miller deduces the ratio of carbons that come from the different plants the birds ate, such as grasses, shrubs, trees, seeds, and fruit.
And what we find is that prior to 50,000 years ago, the emu ate this wide range of food sources, from purely grasses to trees and shrubs. And then after extinction, one whole suite of vegetation they used to eat simply disappears, and after 45,000 years ago, their diet is irreversibly changed to a completely different type of food source.
This change of diet could be a critical factor in the extinction of the Genyornis. When the Megabeasts roamed the Australian outback, it was a lush oasis full of plants and wildlife. Today, it's a virtual dust bowl. Scientists are trying to figure out what went wrong. The largest plant-eating marsupial ever to walk the Australian outback is a giant wombat. It's known as Diprotodon. These huge herbivores live in open forests, scrublands, and grasslands, and consume almost 300 pounds of vegetation a day. The Diprotodons must constantly search for enough food and water to satisfy their huge appetites. In 1893, a remarkable discovery at Lake Calabana in South Australia leads to the excavation and reconstruction of the very first complete skeleton of Diprotodon australis. Since then, hundreds of fossils have been found there, including groups of Diprotodons trapped in a dry lake bed. The evidence suggests a severe drought may have spelled the beginning of the end for these megabeasts. The stomach contents of many of the Diprotodon fossils contain the remains of a drought-resistant plant called saltbush. It tolerates extreme temperatures and can grow in drought-affected areas. When the land grows parched, Diprotodons probably feed on saltbush to survive. In a drought, being big does have its advantages. Large animals can dominate watering holes and dwindling food supplies.
If an area has become particularly drought affected and there is no food left, obviously a larger animal has larger body reserves or fat reserves and is more able to travel the sort of long distances required to get to the next food source.
The huge Diprotodons are well suited for the long treks to find more food and survive the drought. But their immense size could also be their Achilles heel.
The overwhelming influence on the way that this animal moves is its size. So you've got to bear in mind. And
Dr. Stephen Rowe, an expert in megafauna biomechanics, is working with computer animators to bring the creatures back to life.
So you've got to bear in mind and remember that you're talking about, 2 to 3 tons of animal here.
We used rhino reference to get the walks and the trots and so on.
A rhino is probably your closest living biomechanical reference.
Diprotodons are 6 feet tall, 10 feet long, and weigh almost 3 tons. But size alone might not be enough to protect them from environmental peril and fierce predators.
An animal like Diprotodon would have been relatively slow moving, and in a sense this could have made it a better target for a potential predator.
But what they lack in speed, they make up for in size.
Being so large, it could certainly have used its weight to intimidate a potential predator. So one of the ways that you can actually escape predation is to get too big for your predator.
Given their massive size, it seems unlikely that any animal predators forced the Diprotodons into extinction. But their size could also have been their weakness. The key to the mystery of the Diprotodon disappearance may lie in the mass extinction of another huge animal with a voracious appetite, the dinosaur. The Australian Ice Age Megabeasts are some of the biggest, most powerful creatures ever to walk the Earth. There's Thylacoleo, a marsupial lion who keeps its cub in a pouch. And the Geniornis, 4 times larger than its cousin, the emu. And then there's Megalania, the largest lizard that has ever lived. But we aren't sure why it and other megabeasts suddenly went extinct around 50,000 years ago.
It's not well represented in terms of fossils. We certainly do not have anything like a complete skeleton of a Megalania, but there is certainly enough out there for us to be entirely sure that it was very big. Some people would argue well over a ton or so in weight. So this is a potentially devastating animal. It was definitely carnivorous. It had very sharp teeth. These teeth, in fact, were serrated. So basically, it had a mouthful of steak knives. It was incredibly powerful and certainly, theoretically, quite capable of taking perhaps even the biggest of Australian megafauna.
But it's not powerful enough to evade extinction. The answer to the megabeast mystery may lie millions of years earlier, when doomsday struck another group of giants, the dinosaurs. Here, in the small town of Esperanza, near the foothills of the Pyrenees Mountains, is one of the greatest sites in global paleontology. It's providing a new understanding of how large animals go extinct. Paleontologist Jean Lelouf oversees the excavations that have uncovered about 10 different species of dinosaur fossils, dating back 65 to 80 million years. The most important is an herbivorous dinosaur named Eva. Hers is the most complete skeleton of its kind ever found in Europe.
En comparant les os de ce squelette avec ceux d'autres individus découverts sur le même site, on se rend compte qu'ils sont beaucoup plus petits et qu'Eva était donc un jeune individu. Eva mesurait environ 10 mètres de long pour 3 ou 4 mètres de haut et une dizaine de tonnes, et les adultes étaient bien entendu beaucoup plus gros.
Even as a juvenile, Eva eats as much as the largest megabeast, taking in hundreds of pounds of fresh vegetation each day. This enormous appetite ultimately leads to her demise. "65 million years ago, a huge meteor over 6 miles in diameter hits Earth in what is now southeastern Mexico. The impact penetrates the Earth's crust, causing huge fires, triggering tsunamis and severe storms with high winds and acid rain. Temperatures plummet as dust and debris thrown into the atmosphere block out the sunlight. The dinosaurs, and at least half of all other species on the planet, are wiped out.
Dans cette période d'obscurité qui a pu durer plusieurs mois, peut-être même quelques années, les plantes ont donc dépéri à l'échelle du monde entier, et cela a eu forcément des conséquences dramatiques pour tous les animaux herbivores, y compris les dinosaures herbivores, qui se nourrissaient de plantes et se sont donc trouvés sans aucune ressource alimentaire.
As plant-eating dinosaurs starve to death, the carnivores that feed on them also begin to perish. Back in Australia, there's no sign that a meteor destroyed the megabeast's habitat. But the story of the dinosaurs offers a cautionary tale of what happens to large animals when their environment changes drastically. The animals that did manage to survive the meteor all shared one critical characteristic. They're small. There's a clear cutoff. No creature over 55 pounds survives. The larger animals require more food, which is increasingly harder to find. The megabeasts may have died from a similar scenario. If their food source was suddenly wiped out, the megabeasts, with their enormous appetites, would be in deep trouble. Scientists decide to investigate further by reconstructing the megabeast's environment. They're one step closer to solving the mystery of the death of the megabeasts. The date of the megabeast extinction has been one of the longest-running and controversial debates in all of paleontology. Then, at this secret location in southwestern Australia, scientists make an amazing discovery. They unearth the fossilized bones of what appears to be a supersized kangaroo.
What we're looking at here is part of a skeleton of an extinct short-faced kangaroo. These animals were quite widespread across Australia up until about 40 or 50,000 years ago, and this species was common right across southern Australia and particularly abundant in the southwest.
At first, paleontologists think it's just a really big kangaroo. But at 9 feet tall, the fully grown Diprotodon is 3 times larger than the average kangaroo. And there's another difference. It has an unusually short face.
At a very simple level, having a short face means that you can get more leverage to the front of the jaw. Being able to get more power, more force through to the front of the jaw would mean that you'd be able to, for example, bite off a larger branch. Having a longer face, of course, means that if you're a grazing animal, you can have your teeth down in the grass or whatever it is that you're grazing on and still have your eyes a reasonable height from the ground so that you can be alert to predators.
The Diprotodon doesn't need the benefit of a long snout. It's too big for most predators to attack. Which also means it wasn't overpredation that killed off these mega-sized kangaroos. Scientists pore over the skeleton in the southwest cave, searching for other explanations for their disappearance.
If we look at the layers here, it seems to be this was the last level that we get a lot of megafaunal material from. There are really very little megafauna above that, but a lot of megafauna below it. So it seems that this may capture the extinction interval of the megafauna in the southwest.
Scientists will date the sand from this layer that was deposited as the megabeasts plunged to their deaths.
Well, here are some sand grains which we've picked out from around the bones of megafauna. And I want to date these sand grains to work out when the animals which had died in these sands had last been alive.
Before the quartz particles fell into the cave, they were bleached by sunlight, releasing the electrons trapped inside.
So I'm going to spray off any unwanted grains. I'll load it onto the carousel.
When the particles were buried, they began to absorb tiny amounts of radiation energy from the surrounding soil, indicating when they were last exposed to sunlight. By exposing the sand particles to light, the stored radiation is released. Roberts gauges its intensity and deduces the age of the particles with remarkable accuracy.
Well, we've now measured all of the grains, and these are the results we're getting. One of the grains produces a very nice amount of light, and that's a very good grain from which we can work out when those sediments came into the cave and buried the remains of the megafauna that died in those sands. We've looked at several tens of sites now around the country, in caves, in open-air sites, in rock shelters, and they all show very much the same thing. And when you do a statistical analysis of all the dates we got, then the interval seems to be somewhere between about 51,000 and 40,000 years ago. In that interval, somewhere in that interval, the megafauna went extinct.
The scientific investigators now have an approximate time of death. But they need an even more precise date. On the outskirts of Paris, at the National Center for Scientific Research, Dr. Linda Aliff is on a mission to employ a chemical technique known as uranium-thorium dating to pinpoint a time of death for the megabeasts in the cave. She turns to the cave's ancient flowstones. These flat slabs of calcite form when water flows down the walls and along the cave floor. Over time, the flowstones encase the remains of the creatures that have died there. Water filtering into the caves contains a tiny amount of uranium that builds up in the calcite formations. This radioactive uranium decays over time, allowing us to date the formations. By dating the flowstones encasing the remains, we can determine the precise age of the fossils inside.
This is part of the procedure for dating calcium carbonate formations in caves, and we've dissolved the sample in acid. The uranium and thorium get concentrated, and all the calcium in the sample stays in solution.
Aleph uses a mass spectrometer to measure the weight of the molecules. The amount of uranium and thorium present indicates the fossil's age. After years of research, the scientists finally get the answer they've been looking for. The Megabeasts went extinct 46,000 years ago. It's within the time interval identified by Professor Roberts' sand dating techniques. The results verify that the Megabeasts died off quickly in a relatively short period of time. It's a stunning conclusion. Now there's a precise time of death, but the extinction case is far from closed. We still don't know what or who was at the scene of the crime. Around the time the Megabeasts vanish, a new predator appears on the scene. The humans who first walked the Australian outback come face to face with these strange and ferocious creatures. But who are these early humans? And what role, if any, do they play in the demise of the Megabeasts? During the Ice Ages, Australia is joined with New Guinea, and the islands surrounding the continent are bigger than they are today. The sea passages between the land masses are narrow. Early humans used boats to travel from Asia to Australia. They arrive on the northern shore 40 to 70,000 years ago and quickly spread across the land. What happens next will change the course of the continent and all who live upon it. Amongst the strange landscapes of southwestern New South Wales lies evidence of these early peoples.
These are my ancestors' footprints from way back Gundinura. I mean, long time ago. And that word Gundinura, if they were telling us a story, they always put that in, and we knew, you know, what they meant. It was a long time ago.
The footprints date back nearly 20,000 years.
And they're still around.
Lottie Williams is a member of one of 3 tribal groups who are the traditional custodians of the area.
I'd say this one of a girl, and that one back there is a man's footprint.
The footprints were originally formed in mud. As the water dried up, they hardened and then remained hidden by layers of sand for thousands of years. Dr. Matt Cupper is part of the research team that discovers the prints.
The footprints that were found here at Lake Mungo, they were actually on the shoreline of a larger lake, Lake Garnpung. And as we uncovered the layers of sand, we've uncovered over 450 footprints now, and that makes them the largest collection of Ice Age footprints in the world. And they tell us quite a few things about the social behaviour of these early people in Ice Age Australia. We think that perhaps a dozen or 24 people were represented by the different prints on the surface, and so we can see that Aboriginal society consisted of small bands of people. We've got small children rising up to large adult men, so a whole family group or several families walking across the landscape.
No, I think this one's just walking along casually. That one might look like a bit of a runner.
Some of the footprints are a stunning 12 inches long.
We think that they were made by quite tall people, and by measuring the distance between the footprints, we think that they were running quite fast. Some of them were perhaps running at up to 20 kilometres per hour. And so this suggests that they were quite healthy, fit individuals, capable of quite high fits of exertion. Did you see that emu?
See the little bird track there. Rabbit tracks.
Emu track?
Emu.
The ancient legends, or dreamtime stories of Aboriginal people, tell of the Katamakera, animals that lived in forested areas with rich undergrowth and plenty of water. It's said their environment was destroyed and they were forced to roam the continent, and that their bones can still be found today.
Bones of the giant kangaroo, the giant emu, the giant wombat-like critter. It's been found out here 50, 40,000 years ago. It's just to roam around here when these Great Lakes were full. Yeah, it all fits in with their Dreamtime stories. All the scientific evidence, what's been passed down to generations to generations.
The Megabeasts and many other animals fed around this great lake. There are also leftovers from other great feasts. Piles of shellfish eaten by early humans.
So this sedimentary unit here is the Lake Mungo unit, and it dates back to about 40 to 60,000 years ago, corresponding approximately to the timing of the extinction of the Megafauna. Interestingly, this also contains evidence of the first humans in the Willandra Lakes. We've got the bones of Mungo man and Mungo woman and stone artefacts eroding out of this unit, dating back between about 42 and 50,000 years ago. So there's a window of perhaps 4,000 or 5,000 years or so that we think that people and the megafauna were in the Australian landscape together.
It's a short overlap that closely coincides with the death of the Megabeasts. But it doesn't prove that prehistoric people are responsible for their mass extinction.
One of the major problems facing people who would argue for a human hand in the extinction of the megafauna in Australia is the lack of evidence. So there's not, in Australia, for example, a single kill site. There's not, even for a single individual megafauna, any evidence that humans actually interacted with them.
But if humans aren't the culprits, the scientific detectives must track down another suspect. And this one has killed before. Here in the snowy mountains of New South Wales, Australia, scientists are investigating another possible culprit behind the megabeast extinctions. Climate change. Ice Age glaciers, carving their way through the landscape, shape the mountains. The climate is harsh. The rugged scenery is frozen in time.
In solving the mystery behind why the Australian megafauna became extinct, it's important to consider what the climate was like at the time and how it's changed before and since the megafauna became extinct.
Throughout Earth's history, the planet has endured several ice ages. The Earth cools, and colossal ice sheets, up to a mile thick, spread from the polar ice caps to freeze vast regions of the continents. Eventually, the planet reaches an apex known as the glacial maximum. The Snowy Mountains are one of only a few places in Australia that are glaciated during the last ice age. Throughout the continent, temperatures plunge 9 to 18 degrees Fahrenheit.
My work in the Snowy Mountains is centred around trying to work out when the last ice age occurred and how cold it got. I've collected samples from surfaces created by glaciers, either from where they eroded into the bedrock or where they've left rocks behind on the debris ridges left behind by the glaciers.
Barrows dates ice ages by determining when various rock surfaces were first unearthed by glaciers. If an ice age occurred simultaneous with the extinction, it's strong evidence that climate change killed the megabeasts.
When a glacier moves across the surface of the Earth, it scours out and creates fresh new surfaces. And these surfaces get exposed to radiation from outer space. Cosmic rays are continually bombarding the Earth through the atmosphere, and these cause nuclear reactions within the rock.
The reactions create new elements. By measuring the amount of elements in the rock, we can calculate how long ago the glacier moved in and exposed the rock's surfaces. This heavy ion particle accelerator measures the abundance of rare atoms and dates the rock surfaces.
Once we get the sample back to the lab, we need to extract these very rare elements out. And we do this with very powerful acids. And then we take this element and we make a very small target and then place this target into the accelerator.
Everything's good. 25% increase in beams, well worth having.
Yeah. We've found that the first ice age occurred at about 60,000 years ago, and that there were two more after that, one at about 30,000 years and another about 20 to 19,000 years.
These findings confirm that the most extreme glacial maximum occurred long after the megabeasts disappeared. But it also means that the megabeasts did survive other ice age periods, somehow adapting to the extreme climate change. Fossilized footprints at Lake Calibana in South Australia confirm that the Diprotodon has a thick fur coat.
It may well be that the fur of animals like Diprotodon actually got thinner or thicker, depending on the climate at the time.
But Australia's ice ages aren't just cold, they're dry too. Sea levels drop by more than 300 feet, and the island of Tasmania becomes a part of the Australian mainland.
The ice ages were associated with a great drying out of the Australian continent. The deserts expanded and the vegetation, the tree line retreated back into the mountains, and it certainly would have been a hostile time for the Australian megafauna.
Changing something like fur length is a relatively minor adaptive change. Changing your actual physiology to withstand more arid conditions is another thing.
The theory is simple. The Ice Age brought on an extreme drought that decimated the megabeast population. But proving it is difficult. The calcite formations in these spectacular caves provide important clues about the impact of aridity on the megabeasts. It's also one of the few sites on the planet with a nearly continuous fossil record of vertebrate life, spanning the last 500,000 years. This extensive time frame allows scientists to study how dramatic decreases in rainfall affect megabeast populations. Dr. Linda Aliff and her team are looking for fluctuating patterns of growth in the calcite formations, indicating wet and dry periods.
We take samples of stalactites, stalagmites from a lot of different places in the cave, and we date when they grew.
They match the data with the ages of different fossils in the cave. The results reveal that although the populations declined during drier periods, most eventually did bounce back.
What we did was essentially demonstrate that the megafauna did indeed make it through a number of successive wetter times and drier times, but the only time that megafauna didn't bounce back based on our studies of the last 500,000 years was just at the time that humans were in Australia.
The climate change theory leads investigators back to prehistoric Aborigines. Fresh evidence may provide the proof that these early humans unleashed a systematic assault that wiped out the megabeasts. In remote caves around Australia are ancient, intricate Aboriginal paintings. The rock art portrays the daily practices and lifestyles of the earliest people to inhabit the continent and the creatures they encountered.
Aboriginal paintings around Australia are done in a wide variety of different styles, depict a huge range of different kinds of activities, abstract concepts, animals, plants, and they're done in many different ways. There are a lot of caves and rock shelters throughout Australia that show an extremely wide variety of motifs, styles, and of course represent many different ages.
In 1984, paleontologist Dr. Peter Murray encounters an extraordinary painting in Arnhem Land in remote northern Australia.
It was an incredibly ancient painting, older than I'd seen anywhere else in Arnhem Land. When I began to realize what this painting was depicting, I was, of course, stunned, really.
He sees an unidentified animal from the Aboriginal Dreamtime stories with a small trunk, short, robust limbs, and a well-developed tail. To Murray, it bears a startling resemblance to Pallarkestes, an extinct megabeast.
Using the literature that was available to us and the specimens that were currently in museums, most of which were very fragmentary, it was one fervent hope that we might eventually find a very complete specimen to help us refine our reconstructions of it to compare with this painting.
It takes years of searching to find the right specimen.
I actually was not the one who discovered it, however. It was one of my colleagues, and we were very surprised and delighted to see that everything was intact.
The skull verifies that the creature depicted in the rock art was indeed real. It's a major discovery for the team. The painting confirms that humans and megabeasts shared a time and a place in the Australian outback. The arrival of humans to North America and to Madagascar also coincides with a mass extinction of animals. It's a coincidence that has led to the Blitzkrieg theory. A lightning war so swift, it annihilated the megabeasts. It's based on the assumption that humans will always exploit a food source. The theory claims that the Aborigines hunted the megabeasts to extinction through efficient and systematic persecution.
When humans arrived in Australia, it essentially increased almost by 50% the number of big predators on the landscape. So just by virtue of their presence and their need to eat and sustain their own populations, it would have impacted on the megafauna.
Any evidence that humans hunted megabeasts has only been indirect. Then, at Cuddy Springs in north-central New South Wales, scientists make an explosive discovery.
The critical evidence that Cuddy Springs provides is it's the only site on continental Australia that has secure evidence of human artefacts and megafauna bones in association.
Dr. Judith Field is investigating some of the most important megabeast bones in Australia.
In about 5 1-metre squares, I think we've recovered about 141 individual bones that indicate that the whole animals were there and had died there.
Beneath the surface of the ancient lake, she uncovers distinct layers of fossil sediments known as horizons. Each layer corresponds to a different chapter of natural history.
The lowest horizon, this is a swamp. People aren't going to be camping out there, but in the overlying horizon at 30,000, this is definitely a campsite. We've got lots of big, complete pieces of charcoal. We do have burnt bone, and in fact, we have a burnt femur, or the upper limb bone, from one of the extinct kangaroos from this horizon. It does suggest that this was burnt in a fire. A fire in the middle of that clay pan can only have been made by humans.
Among the many fossils at Cuddy Springs is a complete jawbone of a Diprotodon. But in a dramatic twist, lodged between its bones is a stone tool.
This is probably the most exciting discovery, and as always, it's the first discovery, and you spend the rest of your life looking for something equivalent. But the first thing we actually found was the lower jaw of a young Diprotodon. Wedged between it and a limb bone was what we call a core tool.
Core tools are used to make other tools, like blades and stone knives.
The people that I learned to make these tools from, they were full-blood Aborigines, and of course I'm going back 70 years, but they were still making these tools at that particular time. This is a type of quartz or chert stone that we use, and it's a very good stone, as you can see. I used all the modern tools today to make these stones. So what I'll do, I'll strike a piece off with an ordinary hammer. They're beautiful tools, are. And these guys, it's very sharp, as you can see. You can strike big cutting knives off this piece of stone as big as you want it. And indeed, if those megafaunas were like cattle today, big as that, they'd have no trouble of butchering those particular animals up with these ancient stones.
Forensic tests on the stone tools detect minute traces of blood and bone fragments tens of thousands of years old.
When we examined the stone tools that are associated with the big bones, we did find blood. We did find wear traces consistent with working bone and with working soft tissue. And these can only come about by impacting on the bone or defleshing. So if you're filleting an animal, then the impacts of filleting will be reflected at a microscopic level on the surface of the stone tool.
Anything that moved in the Australian bush, my people, they had them on the coals and eat them. And so megafauna animals wouldn't have been any different to the smaller animals that existed at that particular time.
The evidence is clear. Early humans ate megabeasts. But the fossilized animals were trapped in mud as they died. And the ancient tools that were found resemble kitchen utensils more than weapons. Cutty Springs could simply be a massive scavenging site where humans feed on the already dead or dying. But it's hard to ignore the clues that put early man squarely at the scene of the crime. New finds suggest that the Aborigines had surprising skills and sophisticated technologies that made them lethal killers. Early humans are hunter-gatherers. Their most effective weapons are the large stone spear points found in northern Europe and America. These are typically associated with big mammal hunting. Stone cutting tools in Australia date back tens of thousands of years. But stone spearheads aren't used until 6,000 years ago, long after the megabeasts disappear.
The reason that early Australians didn't hunt with stone-tipped spears is that the really fine stone that you need to make very thin kinds of highly refined stone points was not widely available in Australia. There are lots of silkreeds and stuff, which are very good to make implements for shaving wood and cutting and things like that, but very difficult to make perfectly shaped spear points.
There is no evidence for any specialised hunting technology from this period. And it is well acknowledged by archaeologists that what people were making from this period is very simple.
It suggests the tools of prehistoric humans in Australia aren't sophisticated enough to effectively hunt megabeasts. But at Cutty Springs, scientists uncover 30,000-year-old grinding stones. Technology remarkably advanced for its time. These stones won't appear elsewhere in the world for another 20,000 years. Dr. Field traces their origins to a quarry 75 miles away from Cuddy Springs.
To the west of Cuddy Springs, there's a quarry on a hill, which is completely covered with pits that have been humanly made as they've taken out all the sandstone and brought it around.
Dr. Field and her team discover many ancient stone tools.
Hey, Gary, I think I found a hammerstone.
That looks good. Looks like a good one.
What have you got over there?
Oh, I've got a hammerstone here too. That used the edge is the use edge, and it looks like it's been held and banged down that way.
Early humans used the rocks for carving tools and grinding stones, but they weren't suitable for more deadly weapons.
Would this stone have been too brittle for axes?
Yeah.
So it was mainly grinding stones?
Just grinding stones and possibly silcons, which are these other ceremonial type tool.
The early Australians turned to other materials to make more effective weapons.
Australia has an abundance of hardwoods that can be shaped using these other kinds of perhaps harder to work flint tools. And they're every bit as effective as even the most sophisticated stone tips. The argument that Aboriginal people didn't have sophisticated enough equipment to kill big game is, of course, nonsense. At least what we know from the modern toolkits that Aboriginal people made, they were perfectly adequate for dispatching any of this sort of prey.
Their hard-wooded spear points inflict substantial damage. They're most effective in killing the youngest megabeasts. And that alone could lead to extinction.
To wipe out the megafauna actually doesn't take much effort, in a sense. They're very slow-breeding animals. So if just one kill is made per person per decade, that would be enough. If you're picking off the juveniles, not the adults, the juveniles, that's enough to drive that species to extinction, because you're picking them off more quickly than they can actually replace their population. It is a form of blitzkrieg, it is a form of overkill, but it's not the sensational type where you have lots of blood on the landscape. That wasn't happening. It was just small-time barbecues, really, every year by small family groups. And after a few thousand years, maybe only 1,000 years, these species would have disappeared completely from the record.
Even if early humans did have the weapons to kill juvenile megabeasts, not all scientists believe they were easy targets.
A major part of the argument for human hunting as the primary cause of megafaunal extinction is the idea that the Australian megafauna were naive, that they were unused to predation, and because of that, they were easily killed. The reality is that Australia's megafauna almost certainly had predators. So these animals would have had at least some anti-predator responses and defences.
Some megabeasts are ferocious, well armed to attack or defend. Especially the terrifying marsupial lion.
The marsupial lion, Thylacoleo, was right at the top of the food chain in Ice Age Australia. This was an animal with remarkable specialisations. In some ways, it was the most specialised mammalian carnivore of all time. It was well armed with retractable claws on both its hands and its feet. Its thumb claws were particularly well developed. Some people think of these as actual killing weapons, that the marsupial lion actually went in and sliced and diced its prey, opened it up with the claws, and that they might then have bled to death. I think that's pretty unlikely. In reality, these massive thumb claws, I think, would have been used as grappling hooks.
But not everyone agrees that Thylacoleo has the ability to be a lethal killer or to defend itself against human predators. One of its features is especially puzzling. Its teeth. At first look, Thylacoleo's teeth don't resemble those of a typical carnivore. So Dr. Rowe is putting the creature to the ultimate test. He scans a complete skull of a small Thylacoleo from the South Australian Museum. Then he sends the data to his colleagues at the University of Western Australia. Using a technique known as rapid prototyping, they build a full-size cast of the skull and jaw. Prototyping uses computer modeling to create paper-thin cross-sections of the skull. A high-powered CO2 laser beam then melts metal powder into each of the thousands of layers until it finally builds a bronze cast. In collaboration with the University of Newcastle in New South Wales, Dr. Rowe designs a method to estimate the bite force of the marsupial lion. They conduct a series of experiments using computer modeling and a sheep's head.
Okay. First of all, we've had these large incisors at the front penetrate the flesh. Between those upper and lower incisors, it's pulled the neck of the animal back into those massive slicing teeth at the back. And this is a relatively small marsupial lion skull.
The bite of even a small Thylacoleo generates 1,000 pounds of force, close to that of a female lion, an animal double its size. Pound for pound, the Thylacoleo's bite is nearly twice as powerful as any big cat today.
There is no doubt in my mind that a large marsupial lion could have easily killed a human.
The marsupial lion is indeed one of the animal kingdom's most ferocious creatures. When it comes face to face with prehistoric humans, chances are it's the humans who turn and run. For investigators, the mystery of the Megabeast extinction is still far from solved. But the smallest piece of evidence from one species just may hold the key. Professor Gifford Miller is searching these sand dunes for tiny fragments of eggshell from one of the largest flightless birds ever to inhabit the Earth.
There's some bits around, Giff.
Yeah, I got some here. A couple of them.
Miller's research is unearthing new possibilities in the case of the megabeast extinction. Using the eggshells of the Genyornis, he concludes that the bird goes extinct 45,000 years ago. The giant bird lives alongside emus, and both are herbivores. Around the same time the Genyornis goes extinct, the emu's diet changes, and a whole array of vegetation simply disappears.
The changes we observe in the diet after 45,000 years tells us that there was a complete revolution of ecosystems across semi-arid Australia, and that after 45,000 years, the ecosystems were fundamentally different than previously, and they remained in that different state all the way through to the present day. They never returned to the condition they were before.
The change in vegetation spells doom for the Genyornis because it's a picky eater that eats only a few plants. It doesn't have the varied diet of the more successful emus.
The evidence that we've compiled from the dietary reconstructions can explain why a picky eater, Genyornis, that had a very specific dietary strategy, was more vulnerable than the emu, which is a bird that has a very eat-anything kind of feeding strategy.
When the vegetation changes and its usual sources of food vanish, the Genyornis isn't able to adopt a new diet. But it doesn't end there. The change of vegetation causes a domino effect throughout the entire food chain. As the herbivores die off, the animals that depend on them for food also become vulnerable. Carnivorous megabeasts must compete for the little food that is left. And that's not their only problem.
Find anything up there, John? There's a little bit here, Giff.
Miller and his team discover another link in the deadly chain of events. They find several Genyornis eggshells that are burnt.
This cluster of eggshells is obviously from a group of eggs that have been put together by people coming in here. The broken eggshell itself, the burnt eggshell, suggests that it's been in somebody's fire and that they've been cooking them up.
Some of them are burnt completely, and it's possible that could be by wildfires. But many of them exhibit this, what we call point burning, where part of the shell is quite burnt and the rest of it isn't. Here's another example here. And the only real way that this can happen is if somebody has cooked the egg, and after they've shucked it and eaten it, they toss the eggshells back in, and some of them land against the hot coals of the fire on which they've been cooked. And so you get this partial burning of very small portions. All right, this looks like a collection.
Coming off this area here, right down the slope.
I got some nice ones over there.
Yeah, I got a few bits in there.
Yeah, you got them.
Miller also discovers a campsite up the coast where early humans cooked at least 2 other Genyornis eggs. He collects over 2 pounds of eggshells, all with clear evidence of point burning.
And the Genyornis we've actually dated from the site near here. That's ones we found are somewhere between 50 and 55,000, just before the bird goes extinct.
These findings confirm once again that early humans coexisted with megabeasts. They readily used Genyornis eggs as a source of food, further threatening the survival of these huge birds.
Interestingly, Genyornis had more predators than just humans, and you can see here in this puncture the predation by the canine tooth of an unknown animal that was taking the eggs of Genyornis as a food source, puncturing them with their canine teeth, and then eating the poor young inside.
Genyornis are threatened from all sides. Skilled predators, changing climate, vanishing food supplies, and fierce competition from other animals.
But in the past, as far back as we can look, the animals had been able to adjust to those stresses. So we think that the main difference in this window of time, 50 to 45,000, is that humans appear on the landscape, and something in human activity pushed these animals through that threshold beyond which they could not recover it.
Investigators have narrowed their long search down to one critical question. Could humans have altered the ecology of the megabeasts? The extinction of the dinosaurs shows that being big can be a death sentence. We know that around the time of the megabeast extinction, Australian vegetation changes and the outback becomes much more arid. If food sources dried up, the effect would have been catastrophic.
Large animals require more food and larger areas of food. So the large animals will actually, or could theoretically, be the first animals to go.
Vegetation change is the most compelling theory in the megabeast extinction debate. But there's still one piece of the puzzle that's missing. Scientists are searching for what could have destroyed the megabeast's habitat. And where there's smoke, there's fire. The Megabeast investigation now has a prime suspect. Early humans. They have the opportunity, but do they have the motive and the means to destroy the megabeast's environment and drive them to extinction? At the time of the megabeast disappearance, vegetation in Australia changes dramatically. And since then, other types of plants have taken their place.
The present-day landscape, it's dominated today by fire-promoting grasses, mostly spinifex and cane grass, that has very low nutrient value and promotes fire. So it's a highly flammable landscape with very few trees and shrubs in it.
Today, scientists have unearthed new layers of incinerated remains of ancient vegetation.
Bushfire has been a natural part of the Australian landscape for a long period of time, initiated largely by lightning strikes. But what we see beyond about 50 to 45,000 years, just at around about the time humans arrive in Australia, a much greater increase in charcoal frequency.
The charcoal deposits correspond with the arrival of humans and the period of the megabeast extinctions. They also correspond with the disappearance of several varieties of rainforests. Together, they point to a substantial increase in wide-scale burning that transformed the environment.
It seems very likely that that is related to the arrival of people and not just a coincidence.
Coexisting with such large and threatening creatures, early humans think of an ingenious method of trapping their prey: fire. But they also burn the land for other reasons.
Humans burnt the landscape to hunt across the fire front. They burned to promote vegetation that's edible. They burned to clear the landscape for mobility.
This method, known as fire stick farming, most likely wiped out the vegetation in many parts of prehistoric Australia. Before humans arrive, bushfires aren't as frequent or as intense. The megabeasts graze on the many bountiful plants. But the regular burning has devastating side effects. It destroys the plants with palatable leaves and fleshy fruits that are eaten by herbivorous megabeasts. The more burnings, the less food for plant eaters.
I think it's very likely that those increases in fire frequency and fire intensity did put unprecedented pressure on the megafauna populations, and probably combined with hunting were factors that their populations simply could not recover from.
In a few thousand years, early humans changed the ecology of an entire continent and wiped the megabeasts off the face of the earth. For over 1 million years, Australian megabeasts lived through ice ages, drought, and wildfires. But it's humans who deliver the deadly blow.
I believe if humans had not arrived in Australia, the megafauna would still be here today. So we played the decisive role. We pushed them over the edge. We were that extra stress they didn't want.
Recent discoveries on the island of Tasmania support this claim. Here, megabeasts survive 5,000 years longer than on the mainland. But they also go extinct soon after humans arrive.
We were the decisive factor in the extinction of the megafauna. All the dating evidence points toward there being a close conjunction of the arrival of people and the extinction of the megafauna. We have a mechanism to explain it.
The mechanism is fire stick farming, the systematic and regular burning of vegetation. It dramatically alters the landscape and destroys most of the megabeasts' sources of food, driving them to extinction.
We've argued that changed firing of the landscape is the simplest explanation. Landscapes clearly have a sensitivity to disturbances that eventually might be on a continental scale.
But there's still one lingering question. For thousands of years, Australian Aboriginals have had a highly sophisticated system of managing the food they hunt and collect from the land. These sustainable practices are still in use today. So why would their ancestors have destroyed the Megabeasts' habitats to the point of extinction?
When humans came to Australia originally, it was a new landscape to them, completely different to the Southeast Asia they came from. And there was a period of adjustment.
Over time, early humans became familiar with the nature of Australian ecosystems and learned to better manage their natural resources and live in a more sustainable way. Today, humans are still dramatically altering landscapes, but this time, it's on a global scale. We know much more about Earth's ecosystems and the impact of large-scale environmental destruction. And yet, we continue down the same perilous path. Within 30 years, our continued destruction of the biosphere could cause the extinction of up to 1/5 of all living species.
What we don't know is whether, as we convert forests to cropland, as we modify landscapes with building cities, whether there are feedbacks in the climate system that will produce unexpected, unanticipated, dramatic changes to which we're not prepared.
Pollution, the destruction of rainforests, and global warming greatly overshadow the effect our ancestors had on their environment. Human activity now threatens the very existence of the human race.
Si nous acceptons que la grande taille peut être un facteur qui prédispose à l'extinction, et si la destruction de l'environnement que nous connaissons actuellement se poursuit, l'espèce humaine pourrait bien devenir la plus grande espèce animale sur la planète. Et dans ce cas, on peut se poser des questions sérieuses sur ses chances de survie.
The mighty Megafauna no longer roam the Earth, but their legacy endures. These great creatures have allowed us to glimpse a wondrous and little-known world that is no more. They've reminded us that all things are connected. The Earth does not belong to us. We belong to it.